Hello guys, I am Vitold, and I have noticed that many of us have sometimes a hard time differentiating the fairly young family of BMW XR series motorcycles. This includes BMW S1000XR and F900XR, and I'd like to make that much easier for all of you, and I'll show you the differences between them. I will tell you what their heritage is, as this will make positioning them and understanding what they are about so much easier. And I will of course not skip my own opinion on them and which one I would choose, all things considered. So let's rock it and start with the first obvious thing that is included in the name, and it actually confuses many riders. So why is there an S in the S1000XR's name and an F letter for the F900XR? Well, one should definitely wonder, as the approximate capacity indicated in the name is so close, being 1900. But there are night and day differences here. Some will love the benefits that the 1000 gives them, while others, they will prefer the 900. Now the S letter or the F letter or R or even K that got slightly diluted over the recent years, they refer to the engine class in case of the BMW motorcycles. Don't get that confused thinking that S stands for sport, F for fun, as if you would go to the BMW's website, navigate to models and their segments, and there in the sport category you will find, for example, an R1250 RS. So that won't work. S means a 1-liter engine that is there in S1000RR, then it found its way in S1000R, the single one, the naked, slightly detuned, and later into the more touring-oriented S1000XR right here. So that is a high-powered 999 cubic centimeter 4-cylinder engine. Now the F in the F900XR means that there's a BMW's 2-cylinder inline engine, still inline, but not 4 but 2 cylinders, different capacity. But there is a bit more trickiness to this one, as there are 3 variations of this engine and they differ. With S, there was basically 2, one in RR with more power, and the second one basically the same in R and XR. Here in F900XR, which we are talking about, there is 895 cubic centimeters of displacement and 105 horsepower. And there's one thing, the earlier one that sits in BMW F850GS has 853 cubic centimeters and 95 horsepower instead of 105 like in XR. That's why the difference in the name, F850 and F900. But since the F engine has unusually many variations, there's one more version of it in F750GS that is actually of the same capacity as the one in F850, but with less power at just 77 horsepower. So the first difference that you already see in the name of the XR bikes, so the 900 F900XR and S1000XR, is standing for them being totally different engines that have pretty much nothing in common, if there's anything in common they've got. It's not the same story like with F850GS and F750GS, where the engine is the same, just differently tuned in a different setup and less power. No, here the F900 may be considered a baby XR, while the S1000XR is a big daddy here. What is funny though is that even though the 1000 has 2 more cylinders, it has 165 horsepower and seems so much bigger, it's actually not much heavier than F900XR. So the baby one, riding it, I had this feeling of it being the more kiddo, like a childish version here, not really a smaller variant or a detuned version, rather simply as, I would put it as not as capable in certain areas. S1000XR weighs 226 kilograms with fuel, while the 900 is only 7 kilograms less at 219 kilograms. And here is a thing that I need you to know and understand, especially in this case. Weight might not mean that much when you start moving. Yeah, sure, if you're pushing the bike forward and backward or try to lift it from the ground, it means everything. But then once you start riding and you lift your leg off the ground, it is all about balancing center of gravity and how the chassis and suspension are tuned. And screw that, but this is a perfect example. Some of us could probably save that 7 kilograms by not eating a lunch or having the S1000XR with fuel tank being close to empty, while the 900 would be with a tank full of fuel. Then they would weigh basically the same, while they would still feel completely differently and they behave also completely differently, and they do. By the way, the big one has 20-liter fuel tank, while the small, the 900, has 15.5 liters of capacity. Now, my point is that at lower speeds, the difference between how these two motorcycles feel is huge, and it's in favor of the small XR. It feels so much lighter, so much more nimble, and so much more encouraging to just, take it for a ride and just to feel the bike the way it moves. S1000XR feels very heavy to me, and as if it wanted to go only straight, or maybe take a long, gentle curve at a super high speed. That's fine. Maybe that's the way of keeping the bike stable at some super high speeds, but this is a major difference between them. F900XR is to me much more enjoyable to work with at lower speeds. However, that's just a part of the picture, as things actually change. Surprise! That's because F900XR has different suspension that's differently tuned, and it deals with bumps and potholes very differently. Keep in mind that this is not a weight-related thing, and man, what a great learning, by the way. There is an issue with the 900's behavior. I don't mean the engine, the whole bike. But once you start riding on real-world roads that aren't perfect in many spots, and they can be quite rough in different areas of the world, that's when the differences started popping out and the perception kind of shifts. I would say 180 degrees. S1000XR in its second generation is super composed and has so much more forgiving suspension than the first generation, which was very stiff, especially in the rear. Now, this one takes anything you throw at it, and it will still provide you with a lot of comfort, and it won't stress your back at all, pretty much. And I consider that an enormous achievement of BMW, and they clearly listened. Now, I could end it at that, but the thing is that S1000XR is both comfortable and it stays cool and predictable when riding over rough stuff. While this last part is exactly where the challenge is for F900XR, for the baby XR. It just doesn't deal well with any kinds of bumps, even the smallest. It's likely the first bike in a while that I was riding, and I didn't feel secure, I didn't feel safe enough when things were getting more shaky, since the whole bike was getting bouncy, as if it was jumping up and down and left and right like an old tractor, as if there was no damping at all. And don't get it wrong, it's not that the suspension is hard in terms of stiffness, but it's out of balance, it's getting out of control. And this in turn means that whatever you ride over, if you are even at the slightest leaning angle, you will be immediately kicked out of your trajectory, and you will have to fight to put it back on track and to keep going where you want it to be going from the beginning. And you won't have to deal with this in the big S1000XR. Now, if you would ask me if this is because F900XR feels also so much lighter and more nimble, then the answer is a simple no. And that is because there is this motorcycle called BMW R1250GS that is much heavier than both of those here, both of the XRs, and that is even more comfortable and composed than S1000XR when riding over rougher things, and that feels just as light and as nimble or as agile as the small one, the 900XR, at low speeds. So you get the best of the both. It is a perfect combination there, and thanks to that benchmark, we know that it's not one or the other. So not either light and bouncy or heavy and nicely composed. And I'm happy to say it again, It's not the case here. It's all a matter of how the bike is tuned and how various components work together. And if I were to pick between S1000XR and F900XR here, I would go with S1000XR, as it gives me the feeling of control in everyday riding. If I lived in a motorcycle paradise with perfectly smooth roads, then F900XR's bounciness wouldn't even be an issue, since it would never be triggered by rough surfaces and I wouldn't even know about it. Then I would prefer F900XR, probably because of the joy it gives thanks to that light feeling. It's kind of like feeling that you can do anything you want with it and it will always follow, so it's great. Moving on, what about the performance? We already know that there are two different types of engines with different number of cylinders, different power, different capacity. This is 165 and 105 horsepower. Even though 60 horsepower may not look like a huge difference in this case, it looks like a huge difference. Now look, there are two things to say. The first is like with the weight. So the number doesn't tell you everything, and usually that's because of, let's say, weight difference, gearing, torque, and where in the RPM range that torque and power figures actually are located. So the thing to say here is that there are motorcycles which have a similar horsepower number and they feel so much quicker and so much more full of power than BMW's F engine. It is not super slow, any of those bikes with the F engine, but well, they are definitely far from feeling like 100 horsepower motorcycles could feel. And I would expect actually much more from this engine. So clearly I'm personally not a fan of this engine. It's smooth, it works, but I think it under-delivers. It is fine in the BMW F 850GS, despite being even weaker there, but that's a bike with a different purpose. It's just supposed to do something else. It's not necessarily looking sporty, it's not having XR in the name, so most riders won't expect it to be a rocket. If you want a similar bike with similar features but more power, you go for R1250GS, and that's it. With just one difference, because R1250GS, even if it would very much want to, it cannot compete with S1000XR in terms of how quick it can get. S1000XR is a total beast and a spaceship. It is kind of sluggish in the lower RPM, just like most four-cylinder motorcycles are. But then in the second half, and especially closer to the red line, man, it's a monster that will eat anything that gets in its way. The difference between the XR family motorcycles is out of this world, and if you are looking for performance, just forget about F900XR. If you are looking for having that shot of adrenaline when accelerating, only S1000XR will give you that, and this is the second conclusion here. I guess there's nothing more to add other than that it is not really a situation in which one might say, but 105 horsepower is plenty or enough. In this case, I think you should count it as 70 to 80, as this is what it feels like to me. Getting to the next point, both XRs look like they could work as touring motorcycles, and that's true. They look. But I believe that they also can actually. Just take into account how a 165 horsepower motorcycle feels when you put a passenger and luggage on top of it, and how an 70-80 horsepower motorcycle which will feel, so 900XR. But in terms of riding outside the city, they both have adjustable screens that do something. They actually won't protect you very much from the wind, but they will make things calm around, and that's okay. They both can have heated grips. They both have the same safety features, so cornering ABS, traction control, and if you pay extra you can get even LED cornering lights. You can get a quick shifter, so changing gears without pulling the clutch every time, and also keyless start, which is really cool. So a feature letting you start up and shut off the engine without inserting the key into the bike, but instead just having it somewhere in your pocket, in your backpack, wherever on your person. It is not cheap, but these things can be worth it. What's interesting here, talking about the XRs, is that you can equip both in basically the same way, and this gives both motorcycles a nice and wide range of possibilities of customization that are not limited by anything other than your bank account. In fact, that's fair, I would say. In terms of touring, I would say go with S1000XR. in a 9 out of 10 times, and that one only being in place with perfect roads, then yes, maybe I would take the F900XR. But yeah, both can have all types of luggage added and have decent space for a passenger. Now let me mention design briefly, and I love the way S1000XR looks with its sharp lines and a muscular, clean look. I actually really enjoy its proportions and pretty much everything about the way it looks. It's also pretty calm, it's gentle, it's not in your face. The exhaust would have to probably go, but other than that, I think I wouldn't want to change anything in terms of looks. F900XR looks less aggressive and more like a smiley snake, as because of not having that many or not having that large fairings, it doesn't look as muscular, but instead it seems longer, which it isn't actually, comparing to S1000XR. Now the S1000XR has a taller seat at 84 centimeters versus 82.5 in F900XR, but you can always get different seats anyway, so that's not a big deal here. Now you can see that they might be considered very different motorcycles. Perhaps out of visible features only the display is the same, everything else would be different. Maybe that's good. Maybe S1000XR owners would prefer to get something more or just something different, since they pay much more for their motorcycle. And speaking of prices, F900XR starts from around 11,000 euros currently in 2022, with not much equipment already there, while S1000XR starts from 16,500 euros, so exactly 50% more. But is it worth 50% more? Just by hearing 50% more, I would say yes, definitely. But looking at what 50% means in numbers and how much money that is in reality, even before any options, I'm having two thoughts. The first is that it's still maybe tough to justify a 5,500 euros of difference for many of us. So F900XR would look like a fair choice in comparison, especially if you're not that crazy about always getting the biggest, the most powerful, and it doesn't need to be always the best of the best, but just good enough. The second thought is that paying 11,000 euros or more for F900XR might not exactly be potentially worth it. And personally for me, it would not be. There are better and more complete and mature choices out there in this price range. And I'm sorry, I'm very sorry if I offended anyone by saying this, but I value being completely straight here. I feel that BMW did not put enough work into this F900XR, and hopefully they can fix their mistakes in the future, like some other manufacturers, which I'm not going to maybe mention, or I'm going to mention. I'm talking about Yamaha and Yamaha Tracer. So fix like Yamaha did and improve or advance like Yamaha did, and now they're having an awesome proposition in this class. And having this in mind, I would probably do whatever I would have to do, or whatever would have to be done to get the extra cash for the 1,000 out of these two. And that's it from me, guys. I hope that you appreciate seeing my perspective on this matter, and it will be helpful to you in making up your mind. I wish you all the best, and see you in the next video, or on my Instagram called Untitled, which is new and with some hopefully interesting stuff for you guys. See you!